Welcome to the next episode of the Altogether Show. I'm your host, Eric Satz, and with me, Barry Nalebuff, who is both a serial entrepreneur and a serial entrepreneur, which allows him to be a self-proclaimed bad pun artist. Welcome to the show, Barry.
I'm honored to be here.
Well, not as honored as I am to have you, by the way. You're a graduate of MIT, a Rhodes Scholar, previously a junior fellow at Harvard Society of Fellows. You earned your doctorate at Oxford. I'm getting tired of saying all this nice stuff about you. You're the Milton Steinbach Professor at the Yale School of Management.
Yeah.
But in your own words for the audience, who is Barry?
Well, I'm not sure they get the pun about serial entrepreneur that you
They
started
don't.
with. So one of the companies I started was Honest Tea. And later I had a chance to start a breakfast product, an overnight oats company called Maker Oats. And my friends thought that I wanted to do that literally because I could be a serial entrepreneur with a C rather than an S. And there may be some truth to that. So I'm a professor, I'm an entrepreneur, and I like challenging the status quo.
So speaking of challenging the status quo, you and I were together not too long ago, and you took me to the quote unquote best bagel shop in Manhattan, or maybe in the world. And does this make you a bagel connoisseur?
Maybe it makes me a New Yorker in terms of what I like. So I like the bagels that are extra skin on the outside relative to the dough on the inside. And in the old days, people used to scoop out the bagels. Now they have something called flatties or flatleys. And I have to say, the corner bagel shop on 93rd and Lex just does it to perfection.
And given that you're a New Yorker, for every New Yorker, you will find another person who has a favorite and best bagel shop. But that is certainly unique to Manhattan and New York City.
Yeah.
So,
and I'm sure there are folks in Montreal who think, no, that you're wrong. Our bagels are the best. And
yeah, definitely in Montreal, they're thinking that right this second. So, listen, you've done a lot of things to date, many entrepreneurial, but I want to go back kind of maybe to the beginning, even before Belmont Hill, for all the Newtonians out there who know Belmont Hill. Well, where did you grow up, and what were your parents like?
But at Belmont Hill, one of my classmates was Mark Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chief of Staffs, I guess. A reasonably productive class. I grew up in Newton. My dad was a doc. My mom was an editor, and then a stay-at-home mom. And I'm an only child. My mom was a big believer in zero population growth and practiced what she preached.
Well, she's right now.
Yeah, she was ahead of the game in that regard.
She was ahead of the curve. So I want to get some of the fun stuff out of the way before we get into the economics. You're a competitive table tennis player.
I am. I wanted a sport where I could continue to beat my students even when they were half or a third my age. And table tennis looked like a good place to do that. I had been playing squash. I played it competitively in college. And ultimately, I tore my ACL and my PCL. And so that kind of slowed me down. But I won 2 bronze medals at the last Maccabee Games and am going to compete again this summer. So see if I can improve my results.
Nice. Is it the Maccabee Games again this summer? And if so, where is that?
They're in Israel this summer. And the good news is I get to compete in the senior division. So I only have to go and beat other 60-year-olds, not 40-year-olds. Or
is this the first time in the senior division?
No, last time I just squeaked into it, so that may have helped as well. But now I have a coach, actually two coaches. I have the former champion of Venezuela and the former champion of the Philippines as people I work with, and it's made a difference.
What does practice look like for table tennis? I mean, do you play video games for eye hands?
You do not play video games. It's movement. It is getting form. It's so much about technique. And it's not really about arm strength and understanding how to read spin, to respond to spin. It's a completely different than the basement games that most people grew up with.
So then what about paddle grip? How do you hold a table tennis paddle?
Yeah, I think most people these days have moved to what's called shake hand as opposed to the pen grip. The pen grip is just tough on the wrist, and maybe if you grew up with it, it's okay. But even the Chinese players now are moving to pen grip.
Oh, that's interesting. That I did not know. All right, let's get into the economics. I asked you a question about sort of your financial influences, and you said part of your answer was that you have a Spockian fashion.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean?
That means I follow logic and I take logic wherever it brings me. And that was true when I started Honest Tea. And it's true when I think about the ways to invest. So in the case of Honest Tea, logic and economics says that there's declining marginal utility. The first unit of something is great. The second is good. The third is okay. And each unit brings you less and less happiness. So why should it be that beverages have 12 teaspoons of sugar in it? The extra value of those spoons of sugar isn't much, and the cost of calories is going up linearly. So why not 1 or 2 teaspoons of sugar, not 12? And that's what people do when they make it on their own. But all of the products out there, the Snapples, the Sobeys, were all super sweet. And since logic told me that's not the way that people would prefer things, that was the main insight that led to creating this new company, Honest Tea.
You had a partner in Honest Tea. Tell us about how that relationship unfolded and how you decided to really start the company.
It was done and led by Seth Goldman, one of my former students. Seth is the quintessential entrepreneur. He is infinitely optimistic, full of energy, an idealist, and somebody who is a role model for me in my life. He was a student in my class, and we had talked about in class this issue of why were all beverages too sweet. And in particular, I was stuck on the idea of mixing orange juice and club soda, which I thought you could sell for the same price as orange juice, and the cost would be half as much, because it's half water, half orange juice. But I also figured that doing that would be test marketing for Tropicana. And that was not my goal in life, is to come up with an idea and have somebody else steal it. But it turns out 5 years after he graduated, I had been to India and had a chance there to go to a tea auction and discovered that tea is one of the world's greatest luxuries and only costs 5 cents a cup for fantastic tea. And I had been drinking tea that cost a penny a cup that wasn't so great. And I, who's not a tea connoisseur, I'm a bagel connoisseur, not a tea connoisseur, could tell the difference between 1 cent tea and 5 cent tea. And I realized that could be the product that would solve the orange juice and club soda.
So this was literally 5 years later?
It was literally 5 years later.
But good ideas never really leave you, do they?
Yeah, you kind of, they're sitting there somewhere in the back of your head saying, what could I do with this?
I'm familiar with that concept.
Yeah. And so, and Seth happened to call me and said, do you remember our discussions about what we had in class? And he had been at Calvert Fund and itching to do something more entrepreneurial. I said, yes, not only have I remembered it, I now have the product. I even had the name because I had been doing a little work with Tata Group and wanted them to, they wanted to export their teas from India to Germany and the United States. At the time, nobody knew who Tata was. But they stand for reliability, trustworthiness. And so I said, look, call yourself based on what your, you represent? Call yourself Honest Tea. And the response came back, no, I think we'll stay with the Tata name. To which my response was, well, Mr. Tata, I understand that. In that case, I'll take the name. But what I hadn't realized was Honest Tea, the way I spelled it, Honestea, was Ho-Nest-Tea. And so we got into a cease and desist with the trademark because there was Nestea in there. But we added an extra T and a space, and life was good.
Works out perfectly.
Which turned out to be a much better name because the other could be pronounced Honestea, Hones Tea. You don't really know how to pronounce it. And it also doesn't emphasize the key word of honest as opposed to focusing on tea.
I think that is a great and unexpected outcome.
Absolutely.
So we mentioned that you're both a serial entrepreneur and a serial entrepreneur. And between your tea and cereal, you created something a little bit more adventurous for those who enjoy drinking.
Yeah, we one of the things we did at Honest Tea is we made kombucha. I love kombucha, and the problem is that the kombucha we made accidentally became alcoholic. In order for it to be a non-alcoholic product, it has to stay below 0.5% ABV, and either it wasn't refrigerated properly or whatever, those bacteria kept on turning sugar, those yeast kept on turning sugar into alcohol. And somebody drank it somewhere, got pulled over, said it was the kombucha that caused the problem. Maybe that was Lindsay Lohan. I can't quite remember. And Whole Foods went and tested it. They discovered our product was 0.7%. There is no boundary. There is no zone of it's okay, a little bit over. So that led to a national recall. It was $1 million loss. It was a complete disaster. But you know the old make lemonade out of lemons. I figured I now know how to make alcoholic kombucha. And after we sold to Coke, they were not interested in the alcoholic space. They don't do things with alcohol. At least they didn't then. And so they gave us the blessing. And we went ahead and made slightly alcoholic kombucha, which
called it
kombucha. And the motto was get tickled, not pickled.
You are a magician with words.
I don't know, but we certainly have fun with that.
You certainly have pun. Is that what you said?
Yes, and had the opportunity to sell that company to Anheuser-Busch. And so that was good as well. Awesome.
So let's talk a little bit about your role as a professor, because you've been doing it for a long time.
Yeah.
Would you mind sharing with the audience kind of what it is you teach and why students show up in your class?
Well, they show up in my class because it's required. It's a core course, so they have no choice.
There you go. Way to undersell it.
Yes. I did my training as game theory in economics and taught game theory, decision-making, strategy. And most recently, I've been teaching negotiation. I think negotiation is something that is a core topic for anybody graduating with an MBA. It's something that's useful in business. It's useful in life. And every student who graduates the Yale School of Management has to take my class. So
would you agree or disagree that game theory and negotiation are related?
Not only are they related, I think they are one and the same. That is, I take a game theorist, a Spockian, if you like, approach to negotiation. And so many folks have focused on the emotional part, the verbal jujitsu part, and haven't really thought as much about the logic, the principled part of negotiation.
So, and I know you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of times, I think anyway, with game theory, there's a premise that there's a set of rules and a set of outcomes.
Sure.
What if there are no rules and the outcomes are unpredictable?
So actually, that's my first thing that I advise people to do in negotiation is let's agree on the rules. that in some sense I'm a metagame theorist, by which I mean it's about designing the right game. So yes, you have to understand how games will be played, but the real action is in changing the game, in writing the game. A famous person said, philosophers have interpreted the world. The point, however, is to change it. That's Karl Marx. And I'm probably the only business school professor today quoting Marx. But,
Especially today.
but I think he had a point there. And so I am very much about designing games. And in particular, I like to start off a negotiation by saying, what are we trying to achieve here? And you could do it the sarcastic way. You can say, do you want us to proceed where each of us does our best to take advantage of the other and acts like a jerk and possibly destroys the pie in the process? Because I'm ready to do that. And the person say, no, that's, hopefully they'll say no. It's like, yeah, great, because I didn't want to do that either. Let's see if we can create a giant pie together and split it.
So it's funny you should say that, because so my dad's a doctor, and I think the stereotype for most doctors is, bad business people.
Yeah.
But
that's dentists, really.
Well, my dad's an oral surgeon.
Okay, I was getting there.
Tangentially related. I think one of the things that I took from him a long time ago in terms of negotiation or doing a deal was that win-win is better than lose-lose.
That's 100%.
And
but I don't want win-win to be a euphemism for lose-win.
Exactly. No, I actually mean win-win.
Yes.
So you've written a new book called Splitting the Pie. Mm-hmm. And the other thing that people often say is never split in the middle.
Yeah. So split the difference is not the same thing as split the pie.
Yeah. So if you don't mind, talk a little bit about this.
So let me use a recent example, and it concerns my mom. She lives in a little house in Florida, and she's been renting it from the same person for the last 10 years. But with work from home, that area has become quite hot. And so the person who she rents from says, hey, I'd like to put this on the market. And are you interested in buying it? And let's say for a moment, we'll come back to this, that the price should be $800,000. Well, if my mother buys it from him, he's going to save $40,000 in real estate commission. He won't have to pay a 5% fee. So there's two questions really in terms of the negotiation. One is, how are you going to split the real estate commission? And what is the price of the house?
Yep.
Now, one view, perhaps his view is, look, to buy an equivalent house elsewhere is going to cost you $800, so you might as well give me $800 or $799. She could come back and say, well, if you sold to anybody else for $800, you'd only get $760. So why not $761? And my view is there's a $40,000 savings that exists. The two parties should split that $20K. And he might say, well, it's a hot market, so I should get more of it. And my view is the hot market is why the price should go high or low. But that shouldn't be affecting how we split the $40,000 savings. And actually, he agreed on that point. And so then it was, well, okay, now we are going to split the $40K 2020. Now what's the right price? And the good news is there were a handful of houses on her very street that had sold this year in the last 6 months. So it wasn't that hard to figure out a price per square foot and adjust for her house compared to the others. And so essentially what we did is we said, look, are you happy getting the market price? You could try and hold out for somebody who's going to pay above market, but you might end up in the end getting somebody who pays below market. And so if you're prepared to get market price, we can estimate that using this data. And ultimately what we do is turn the negotiation problem into a data problem. And the data problem is a whole lot less controversial. It's like, if you give me other sales, if you give me reasons why this formula isn't really quite right, sure, I'm happy with that.
So let me ask you a question because I want to make sure we're on the same page. So you were going to share the commission. You
The-
agreed 50%,
yeah, 20. So,
20,000,
and this is
20,000.
not, let's be clear, it's not splitting the difference. It's splitting a pie here. There's a $40,000 pie
Right.
that only is created if he sells to my mom and my mom buys from him.
Right. And so that pie is created. Now, what if you go do those market comps
Yeah.
and you get your square footage and it comes out to be 820?
Then we should do a deal at 800. And he is $20,000 better than selling to somebody else because he would only get 780 from that other person.
Right.
My mom is 20,000 better because she'd have to pay 820 to buy the equivalent property elsewhere, which is only 800 from him.
So you really were agreeing on the commission based on the listing price up front and
No,
then going out.
Not quite. There was I don't care about the listing price. Listing price, in my view, is irrelevant. It was, he had a listing number. I ignored it. It was, there's $40,000. We should split it. And then to figure out what we're going to take the 20,000 from, we should calculate a market price. And so that's our estimate of where this thing is going to settle. Not what you're asking for, but what do you think people end up paying?
Right. And so if it was above the 800, he was going to do a little bit better. And if it was below the 800, you were going to do it. Your mom was going to do a little bit better.
Yeah, I'm not sure I completely followed you about the above or below. That is, as it turned out, he asked for 800, but I'd say when we did the regression, we discovered the market price was really closer to 760. And I think that's right. I think he was actually anticipating not getting 800 in the end. I think he put it up a little higher. And by the way, let's be clear, that was 100% higher than it was a year and a half ago. So it wasn't
Right.
so it wasn't that he was reflecting the new market.
My point was you had to start somewhere to figure out what the commission bucket was.
Yes, I see. So the commission bucket, we knew the price was going to be around 800.
Right. So you said that's how you started with the pie, and then
Correct.
you had the up and down. So it sounds like rule number one in a negotiation is what's the objective?
What's the objective? What are we negotiating over? What value can we create? How can we make that value even bigger? And what I find all the time is that people use creativity as a last resort rather than a first resort. So I've just been spending all morning today debriefing a negotiation exercise where students are buying a bench from a carpenter. And it turns out that the carpenter's willing to do it, the woodworker's willing to do it for a very good price because he gets to do this with his son. And it's high quality time. And it's a bench at a lakeside house, sorry. And basically, by not asking questions, they don't discover that the person making the bench is bringing their kid along. And if they did, they'd say, bring your bathing suit or use my kayaks and go fishing. And basically make this person really want to do this deal because it can make it even more fun for the person to be there with the kid. They jump so quickly to price that they don't understand why this person is doing this deal. Oh, you're doing it with your kid. How old's your kid? Is this your day job? Is this your hobby?
So let's bring that down if we can to rule number 2.
Sure.
So part of me wants to say, ask questions,
Always.
understand motivation.
Absolutely.
So, and then it sort of seems like, hey, use my kayak.
Yeah.
Use my pool.
Yeah.
Use my lake, whatever it is. That's a free giveaway.
Yeah.
That creates goodwill.
I'd say it creates pie. You're calling it goodwill. It's basically, it's a reason for the two of us to transact.
Okay.
It's something that I can offer that other people can't. Just like the person, my mother buying from this buyer, we can avoid a real estate commission. Other people he's going to provide a bench for aren't going to be able to give you the afternoon fishing, swimming in this lake.
Is there a third rule?
Well, I'm not sure we even got to, I think there's a rule between 1 and 2 even. Maybe
Tell
1
me.
and,
Tell
So
me.
it is,
I haven't taken the class yet,
yeah.
Barry.
So I'd say the first thing is understand why it is we're having this negotiation,
Mm-hmm.
and then talk about the ground rules, which is our goal is to create this big pie and split it. Can we agree on that? Now, having agreed upon it, now what our job is, let's figure out how to make the pie big.
So what's so interesting to me about this conversation is so much of what I think is happening both in this country and around the world right now assumes a zero-sum mentality,
Yeah.
which is that if you're doing better, then I'm doing worse, which means I have to do better so that you do worse. And you're describing something entirely different.
I wish it were only zero sum. I actually think people go for the negative sum, which is basically, I'm happy losing $1 if you lose 10. So zero sum would be an improvement from where we often are. Yes. And it's counterproductive.
Where can this mentality, not the zero-sum mentality, but maybe coopetition,
Mm-hmm.
where do we see this play out in real life in a way that the masses could benefit or do benefit?
Well, we're seeing it now all over the place in terms of the automobile industry. You have car companies coming together to work on autonomous driving. So Ford and VW are doing that. You have car companies that came together on fuel economy during the Trump administration to basically have a standard in California rather than having every different state having their own different standards. One of the remarkable cases is you have Apple and Samsung working together. Samsung provides the screens for the Apple iPhone. Meanwhile, Samsung Galaxy is competing against the iPhone.
Right.
And so here they are arming the enemy. And Apple at one point was suing them for $1 billion, even while they were working together on the phone. So we thought of naming our book War and Peace rather than Coopetition. But one, we discovered the title had already been taken.
Uh-huh.
And two,
a long time ago, by the way.
A long time ago. Titles are not copyrightable, so we could have done it, but still, it might have been a little too far of a reach.
Uh-huh.
And two, when Tolstoy talks about war and peace, it's endless cycles of war followed by peace. 7 years of war, 7 years of peace. And what I'm thinking about is simultaneous war and peace. And what you've also caught on is that I'm a Johnny One Note. So coopetition was about creating and capturing value in business strategy. When it comes to negotiation, it's the same damn thing. It's we work together, create a big pie, and we fight over how to divide it up. But if we can resolve the fight early on by talking about splitting it, then we don't have to watch our back. We can now go forward and just think about how to create a big pie together.
Totally agree with that. I mean,
and
that I honestly, I feel like life's too short otherwise.
And you also don't want to be dealing with jerks. So there you go.
No asshole rule. Yeah.
That's rule 0. That's rule 0.
So you're a prolific author, by the way. So you also wrote Mission in a Bottle.
Yeah.
Which was obviously the story of Honest Tea. It's not obvious, but it was.
That's true.
Story of Honest Tea. Can you talk a little? So it has a unique format.
Yeah. And that was Seth's idea. One is, does the world need another How I Built My Business book? And the answer is probably not. But we wanted to make it fun. We wanted to make it accessible. And so we did it in cartoon format, in graphic format. And never have I realized the importance of every word, because those bubbles have 16 words in them max. And so you can't kid around. You can't be verbose. There's, I guess, a famous line from Abraham Lincoln. Apologies. I didn't have time to write you a short letter, so I wrote you a long one. And you and I had somewhat of a similar conversation when we were standing on your roof in the snow not too long ago. I thought that was Einstein, by the way. No, Some people say it's Goethe, but I believe it's.
You think it was
I think it's
Abraham
Abraham
Lincoln?
Lincoln. Now, maybe Einstein quoted him. I won't promise you on that. Um, and then the other thing that's we try and do is talk about all of our mistakes and how what we learned in hindsight and what messages we can help you to avoid those same mistakes that we made. And I would say the biggest one was actually not really understanding what our business was. That
What business did you think you were in?
we thought we were in the tea business,
What business were you in?
in the honest business, the business of selling things that customers can trust. And let me say, we eventually figured that out. Our first product line extension was tea bags, which ended up being a disaster.
Yeah.
But then we understood that the same issues of drinks that are too sweet apply to kids' drinks. And Capri Sun had more calories in it than a Coca-Cola. And so essentially we took fruit juice, we diluted it with water, we made it organic, we got rid of the high fructose corn syrup, and that created Honest Kids, which is now a bigger business than Honest Tea.
Yeah.
What we didn't realize is how far we could have taken it. And so, in fact, now there is the Honest Company, which makes sunscreens and diapers and everything else you can imagine. And that's something that we could have done if we had truly understood how extendable and how important and how valuable the Honest name was.
So is it, when you say that, I think I know what you mean, but it's not so much the Honest name as much as I'm asking,
Yeah,
as what the brand stands for.
absolutely. So when you put the word honest on something, people challenge you. They say,
Right.
what makes you honest? Does it mean the other people are dishonest? And people would say when we had calories per bottle, we had calories per serving.
Right.
And it was, they say, 30 calories per serving. But they say, oh, you're being dishonest because you have 2 servings per bottle. And so you should really be putting 60 calories. And we said, you're absolutely right. But the FDA requires us to do calories per serving. However, we looked into it some more and we discovered there was nothing prohibiting us from also putting on calories per bottle.
Yep.
And so we added that. And we were the first company to go ahead and list things in that way. It turns out you can round down calories when it's below 5 to 0. And companies like PAM, the oil spray,
Yeah.
if you look at it, they say 0 calories, although it's nothing but fat. So how could it be 0 calories? Well, it's because they have 375 servings in there.
The calories per serving thing, like I get it in some context, but for the most part, it drives me batshit crazy.
Yeah,
It's like, are you really going to just drink half the bottle?
exactly. And so that's why we list calories for the bottle. And essentially, we had to be completely honest in everything we did. And our customers kept us that way, and that was good.
Totally, 100%. So, I mentioned Einstein a second ago, and you corrected me on something that I said the last time we were together. I mentioned that Einstein referred to compound interest as the eighth wonder of the world. And you said Einstein didn't say that. And I believe you, by the way, but neither of us, I think, knows who actually said it or if it just, or
Well,
do
I think the famous quote is that somebody quoted Einstein as having said that.
Right.
And it sounds like the kind of thing that he would say. It's sort of the greatest force of nature is whatever is. It's not E equals MC squared. It's compound interest. But he's right that whoever said it is right. That is an amazing.
So let's talk about that a little bit, because obviously the audience has some interest in investment and,
Sure,
more importantly, returns.
Yeah.
So you are a big thinker on something called life cycle investment.
Ian Ayres, my colleague at the law school, and I wrote a book on this topic. And I think it's one aspect of investing that almost nobody understands, which is the idea of diversifying across time, as opposed to diversifying, or not as opposed to, in addition to diversifying across stocks. So we know that you don't get paid extra for the risk that you take on if you just hold one stock rather than a basket of stocks. At the same time, you don't get paid extra if you put all of your money in investing in one decade rather than over your whole lifetime. So if I said to you, how much money would you like to invest in your 30s, your 40s, your 50s, and your 60s? Would you like to invest a whole lot more in your 60s than your 30s? I'm hoping the answer should be no. I'd like the same amount of market exposure in each of these decades. And the reason is that stock returns over time are actually very uncorrelated. And so essentially, there's less correlation across time than there is across stocks. And so by investing when I'm 30, 40, 50, and 60, I will have less total risk than if I put all of my money in the market when I'm in my 50s and 60s.
So let's try and break that down a little bit, because, well, first thing, assumption. Do you have to assume certain cash flows over, let's just call it 3 different decades?
Yeah, great. So let me first go into hypothetical land and then bring it to reality.
Great.
So if I had $2 to invest in my 30s, $2 in my 40s, $2 in my 50s, I would put in the market 2, 2, and 2. And variance, which is the measure of risk, is proportional to the square of how much money I have invested. So that would be 4 plus 4 plus 4, 2 squared times 3, or 12. And that would be the ideal diversification across time. But of course, what people do is they invest 1 in their 30s, 2 in their 40s, and 3 in their 50s. And the variance of that is 1 squared plus 2 squared plus 3 squared, which is 14. So it's more variance for the same amount of total market exposure. Now, the natural response to that is, well, of course I'm doing 1, 2, 3 because I'm poor in my 30s. I don't have the money to invest. And basically I add 1 each year, or I add 100,000 or 10,000 or whatever it is. And so that's why I'm going from 1 to 2 to 3. And my answer is, that's why you want to invest with leverage when you're young.
Explain quick
Sure.
explanation of what leverage is for folks.
So leverage you can be thinking about is investing on margin. It is essentially borrowing money. Just like when we buy a house, we put down 20%. So that's investing at 4-to-1 leverage. When you buy stocks, if you put no leverage in, then you're investing with 0 leverage. If you put in 20%, you'd be investing with just a little bit of leverage. You put half in, it'd be 2-to-1 leverage. You'd be a lot less leverage than what we consider using when we buy a house.
So now people say investing in venture capital is risky.
It
What
is.
about investing on margin?
Yeah. So the answer is, what I want to do is have the same amount of exposure to stocks. And so the risk is not, in some sense, due to the margin. The risk is how much money I have invested. And having 2 plus 2 plus 2 is $6 decades, if you like, of investment. And that has less risk than 1 plus 2 plus 3. So my risk is based on exposure. Now, if what I do is instead of doing 2, 2, 2, I use leverage to get 4, 4, 4. Yeah, that's more risky because now I'm getting more market exposure. And so our goal here is not to say use leverage to invest more in the market. Our point is use leverage to readjust when you're getting exposure to the market and smooth it out. Because essentially, I bet this is true for you. I'll just ask, how much exposure to the market do you have now compared to your 20s, 30s, and 40s?
I have more exposure to the market now than I did in my 20s.
And how about your 30s? You're not 30 now, are you?
Now I'm 52.
Yeah. So how about compared to your 30s?
More.
Compared to your 40s?
More.
Yeah. So now here's my point. what I want you to do is take less now and spread some of that back to your 20s, 30s, and 40s, which unfortunately you can't go back and do. Okay. And so the goal is to rearrange things, not to say we're going to elevate everything. My grandmother.
So Barry, this goes back to the very first assumption of, I think I will make X, and over the next whatever period of time,
Yeah.
and I'll be able to save Y percentage.
Sure.
For investment purposes.
Yeah.
And so whatever Y is, if I'm spreading it out over time, I ought to find the right amount of leverage in my current situation so that I'm mimicking that in the next decade and the decade after. Would that be correct?
And we do that with housing. We don't basically, in some sense, every 5 years, whatever, get sort of bigger and bigger houses. We buy a house with leverage that's going to last us 20 years, if you like. Now, sometimes we're sort of in our 20s, we might be moving up some.
Starter homes.
And look, I love my grandmother, but she made a big mistake, which was when I was born, she gave me a savings bond that matured when I was 20. Okay, that was lovely thinking, but I didn't need more exposure to bonds. I needed more exposure to stock. And so what she should have done is bought me a mutual fund, a share in Berkshire Hathaway, same amount of money, but essentially she gave me the safe investment for my first 20 years. And I can't go back and get exposure to the stock market during my first 20 years.
So let's talk about that. Exposure to stocks and bonds. So we're talking about, and you're talking about in terms of life cycle investing, diversification over time.
Sure.
That at Alto, we like to talk about diversification across asset classes, not just stocks. So
let's go there. So what are the asset classes? There's real estate. There is venture capital. There are bond funds that aren't just government bonds. There's intermediate debt, mezzanine debt funds. There are crypto assets. There's art. And of course, there's real estate. And therefore, it would be great to have access to lots of different passively managed. Now, you can't actually passively manage venture capital, if you'd like, or at least we don't have the easy ability to get a little bit of Kleiner Perkins, a little bit of
you and I don't.
benchmark.
Some people do.
Well, we can't, even those people sort of have to make a large investment. They can't just get the equivalent of the mutual fund or version of that. Now, sometimes we can because we can invest with Fidelity, and Fidelity will do that for us because they can sometimes have access. But in general, you want to do two types of diversification across time and across asset classes. And it's domestic plus international. It's staid companies and emerging companies.
What do you think of what we're seeing right now with respect to the growing interest in what I don't think I'm alone in characterizing as cultural assets? So artwork and baseball cards and Michael Jordan sneakers and antique automobiles.
Yeah. So one thing is I'm against buying art and putting it in a crate somewhere and paying for storage. It just seems to me that the value of these assets has to include the consumption of enjoying them on the wall.
I agree.
Because they're not paying any dividends if that's like a bond that doesn't pay any dividends.
That's right. That's a great point. But I think first of all, I would never buy a painting that I wouldn't want to put on my wall.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, no investment is worth that.
And then the idea that you pay extra for storage in some temperature-controlled place in some dock in Switzerland seems to me just another level of craziness.
But from an investment perspective, assuming it is something that you want to hang on the wall or put in a display case or wear on your wrist, if it's a
Yeah.
Rolex watch of some sort. Should people be thinking of these cultural assets as investments as they would stocks and bonds? Is this a good idea?
Well, yes and no, in the sense of yes, if they're enjoying the dividends they're getting from them. No, if they're not. In the
That,
sense that
that,
that's part of the payoff to these assets. And if you're not the one who's getting, it'd be like buying a basketball team and not actually liking the sport. You're the
so,
wrong person to be owning it.
but people do that.
I don't think anybody who buys a basketball team doesn't enjoy being there on the court.
Well, I certainly hope most enjoy being there. I do. And by the way, I'm not picking on basketball or basketball owners. I think there are some people who purchase things because they think they ought to. Maybe I'm wrong.
Okay, but I'm saying I think they are not always the right owner, if you'd like.
So let me ask you another dividend question.
Mm-hmm.
I own an interest in X.
Okay.
So I own an interest in the Lakers.
Yeah.
Is that a dividend being able to say that?
Depends. Do you get to have courtside seats? Do you get to hang with the players at some point? Do you get to make your objections known to the coaches when they mess up? So
What if I just get to tell my friends that I'm an owner of the Los Angeles Lakers?
And it turns out if that gives you joy and makes your friends envious and you like making your friends envious, I'm down with that. So it's how you get who's it for me to say how you get your happiness?
Yeah, that's a great point. I do think that's some of what's driving the interest in cultural assets today. And in part, you have to apply that, I think anyway, to NFTs and what's happening in that space. But tell me if you disagree with that.
Yeah, I have to say I don't really understand that.
I'm not
And
saying I understand it.
because I, of course, get I can have that same digital image that you can have for free. And so somehow
But you're going to the point I was just making, which was I get to say I quote unquote own it.
yeah. So here's the thing about owning it, and it's a little bit like owning a basketball team. You would better think that it's profitable to do that. Because as soon as those NFTs start going down in value, now you're not going to be so proud telling everybody that you're the sucker who ends up holding on to them. It's not going to be a story that you're like, yeah, I was the guy who invested with Bernie Madoff. It's like, no, that was not something I'm going to be sharing with folks. So it's only fun as long as it's making money.
Right.
And that's, to me, the problem, because an asset of that form, which doesn't actually provide anything real, it's all based on perceptions, and those perceptions can change. There's nothing anchoring it down.
So I want to go back to table tennis for a second.
Sure.
Have any of your students beaten you?
Damn it, one has. And
He or she?
He's from India, and he has a serve that I have just not yet really been able to respond to. So
So a lot of spin.
A lot of spin. It just bounces off the table, or I pop it up. And so when I'm serving, I'm winning 80% of the points. But when he's serving, he's winning close to 100. And that's the
Delta.
That's the delta. So, but I'll take that as the exception that proves the rule.
All right. And is there a table tennis portion of the class? Like where is there an invitational? Is there a Barry invitational?
Absolutely. So we have each year the students bid to play the faculty.
I'm going to ask you to move over a little bit. You're going out of
each
screen.
year we ask the students to play the faculty. And I think for 9 out of the last 10 years, the faculty have beat the students. And
wow,
that's a source of pride and frustration for us, and frustration for the students because it's all public. It's done in a large courtyard. Everybody gets to see it. So,
what's your favorite part about teaching?
It is forcing me to learn things that you can't make stuff up. So I started teaching negotiation 10, 12 years ago, and it was really not something I started copying, taking what other people did, and I wasn't happy with what I was doing. It didn't seem to have the foundations. I couldn't explain various answers. And so essentially forcing me to figure something out. And then getting the students to see the light bulb, to get them to change their minds, which you rarely get to see anybody change their minds. But I can change somebody's worldview on negotiation in under an hour. And that's amazing. That's a real privilege.
That really is. So, wow, I wish I could change anybody's mind in under an hour. That would be something. Do you have a favorite client? Do you have a favorite negotiation client?
Well, I love all of my children equally. I would say that getting to work with the NBA was a unique privilege, and I helped them in their negotiations with the players. So I like to say I work with the short billionaires against the tall millionaires. And the thing about it, okay, yes, I got to go see All-Star games and but I'm actually not a sports fan. So that was in some sense lost on me.
Right.
On the other hand, the high stakes, the emotions, the solving the problems that actually allowed the sports to go on, to me, that was sort of the equivalent of being in the NBA of negotiation.
So, you don't work for the MLB. Is that correct?
That's correct.
What do you think's going on there?
I'm not following it
Okay.
well enough. The challenge is to recognize the bargaining power of the players and what is it they're bringing to the table, and what is the pie that's being created, and is it being split in any sensible way? One of the smart things that the NBA has done is essentially change the split of profits based on what revenues are.
Right.
And so players are getting a higher share of revenues to the extent they're able to help grow the pie. And that's giving them the right incentives. And that doesn't exist in all the different sports.
It seems to me to make sense no matter what the business is.
Yeah.
If you're able to increase the absolute size of the pie, people can do better.
And they should do better, and give them the incentive to do that.
Yeah, exactly. Aligning incentives. I don't know. We didn't get there.
Yeah.
But it feels to me like aligning incentives should be one of the rules.
It is. I'll give you one last example on this. It's one of the problems I think we have with global warming.
Mm-hmm.
So when you drive a car, you pay for gasoline. You don't pay extra for insurance.
Right.
The cost of auto insurance is roughly $1,200 a year. It's about the same as gas if you're driving 10,000 miles. So we say to people, you can have all you can drive auto insurance, but we don't say you can have all you can drive gas. If we align incentives correctly, you'd be paying the equivalent of an extra $3.50 a gallon, $3.50 for 25 miles of auto insurance. We would be effectively doubling the cost of driving. And people talk about carbon taxes of 50 cents a gallon, $1 a gallon. Nobody's talking about $3.50. And yet we're subsidizing car driving by $3.50 for the equivalent of a gallon of gas. And we create terrible incentives. Therefore, people drive too much. And also we have way too much global carbon emissions.
So insurance is a funny thing. Shouldn't it all be based on activity?
Absolutely. I think insurance should be, well, let's be clear. It should be based on activity and your skill at that activity.
Right.
And so I think it should be pay per mile, but rated on your experience per mile.
I agree with you.
And not only would it fix incentives in terms of carbon emissions, women pay twice as much as for men on a per mile basis. That is, they pay the same amount for insurance and drive half as much. Well, that's not right. So we
It's
can
just
avoid
not.
gender discrimination too.
So, last thing, and then I'm going to let you go. Uh, Not everyone gets to invest in alternative assets.
Yeah.
How do we fix that?
Well, I think there's 3 things we need to do. One, we need to move away from a position where I have to pick one asset versus another. So basically, I've got this friend, Vinny, who has this access to this crypto thing or this new startup, because essentially you don't want to be putting your eggs in this one risky basket. So you want to have somebody who allows you access to a broad variety of these risky assets. You also want to do this with somebody who's a trusted agent, who's doing this for lots of people, who's open about this, who, like Vanguard, has low fees, has transparency. And you want to be able to do this in a place where essentially you can get Einstein's 8th miracle, the compound interest. So whether it be a retirement account, seems like a pretty good place to be thinking about this.
Mm-hmm.
And so having if you like, the mutual fund version of alternative assets, and it could be a multiple mutual funds. It could be the crypto mutual fund. It could be the startup mutual fund. It could be the artwork and other NFT crap mutual fund. But so just like I can do mutual fund of right now telecom, or I could do growth, or I could do value. So having a couple different funds so that I can do weighting based on what I like to do strikes me as the approach. And one of the real problems today is we don't make it easy. We make it hard for those people, and we make it riskier and scarier. And that, to me, is something that, as far as I know, you are fixing, and that's going to make the world a better place.
Well, we're certainly trying. I'm going to take you with me to Congress and the SEC to negotiate a little bit, see if we can make some more headway faster. Barry, thank you so much for being on the show. I'd love seeing you and having this conversation. I think people are really going to enjoy listening to it.
Thank you for inviting me, and looking forward to investing with you.
That sounds great.
The Altogether Show is brought to you by Alto. Alto knows that achieving true portfolio diversification means investing in more than just stocks and bonds. That's why Alto developed a streamlined platform to make it easy and cost-effective to invest tax-advantaged retirement savings in alternatives, assets like real estate, venture capital, and crypto that are outside of the public markets and available through Alto's growing list of investment partners. To learn more, visit altoira.com/altogether.